Recently on TikTok, a Muslim couple appeared on my For You page. I'd seen them a few times before and I really enjoyed their videos. It's kind of fun to learn about different cultures and religions. And the two of them typically presented their educational videos in cheerful, energetic tones. Lego! The one I came across confused me for a second because I thought it implied that they had gotten a divorce, which made me sad in a parasocial way. They had not, which was nice, of course, because they seemed like they were a cute, loving couple. I scrolled through their page for a second, just curious about what they've been talking about recently, and came across a video with the label, "Can a trans woman see my face?" Here's the bit.
Can trans women see my face?
Let go.
All women can see my face. However, there are limitations. Firstly, I would not show my face to a woman I just met for the first time. I would have to know her and trust her first. Secondly, if I know a woman will describe my face to her husband or someone else that can't see my face, I'm not going to show my face to her.
What if that person's your friend?
My friends don't do that.
What if the person was a trans woman?
Firstly, before answering this question, I would like to say that I believe in being kind to everyone, regardless of their beliefs and regardless of what they identify as. That being said, in Islam, we go by gender assigned at birth when it comes to showing my face to certain people. And since a trans woman would be assigned the gender of male at birth, they would not be able to see my face.
What about a transgender man?
Firstly, I don't think a transgender man would be interested in seeing my face because they'd want to be treated like a man. And anyway, if I saw a transgender man, I would probably assume they're a man because of what they appear as. So I'm not going to interact with them to the point of getting them to see my face.
What if they were a relative and you knew they were a transgender man?
That's never happened to me before, so I would not know how to navigate that situation. I would probably talk to a scholar.
Can transgender people become Muslim?
Islam is for everyone. Anyone can become Muslim.
Took me aback watching it. It surprised me slightly because of how positive they seemed, but that wasn't really shocking. One of the seemingly sweetest people I ever met turned out to be a virulent homophobic Catholic who thinks gay marriage should be outlawed. What really got to me was the comment section. The comments are filled with things like, "Respectful queen. This is the definition of respect." And "You really approach this with kindness." What's interesting is that I think those commenting see themselves as general progressives. A handful were trans people fawning over themselves to praise the video. In case it isn't clear, Mehdi and Mubina in this TikTok are being transphobic. "In Islam, we go by assigned gender at birth." Now, that might hit you as being obviously a transphobic religious belief, and you would be correct. But the video is also structured in a specifically transphobic way. After their little intro, Lego, Mubina says, "All women can see my face. However, there are limitations." She then lists 2 limitations. She has to know her, and she has to trust this woman wouldn't describe her face. This is presented as a list with the label, "2 conditions for women to see my face." Obviously, as long as those 2 conditions were met, any woman could see her face. Her husband then asks some clarifying questions. After questions about friends, there's one about trans women. There are buffer questions for the meat of the video. Trans women aren't allowed to see her face. Now, in my critical reading of the text, I have to point out that this ordering seems insidious. The point is to launder transphobia while distracting you about what it is. It isn't just that trans women can't see her face because they were assigned male at birth. All women can see my face if they meet these 2 requirements. Trans women can't. The logical conclusion between those 2 statements is trans women are not women. That's just plain transphobic. When asked about trans men, she says that assuming they pass, she wouldn't talk to them in the first place. But she also said that trans men want to be treated as men. That phrasing, benign as it may seem, connected with the rest of the video, means that she believes trans men are not men. When asked if a trans man and her family could see her face, she says she would consult a scholar. Now, I find that pretty interesting, because if, as she says, Islam goes by gender assigned at birth, there should be no need to consult a scholar at all, to consult anyone. The answer is clear. That trans man, according to her religion, would be a woman who could see her face. But Mubina doesn't say that. As YouTuber Sean says in his video on Posey Parker,
"One minute she refers to trans men as poor living figures who protected without their own bodies, and the next minute she refers to them as dangerous users to be sterilised to prevent reproduction. On the surface, it doesn't make sense, does it? I went back and forth on this trying to understand how one person can believe what seems to be 2 directly contradictory things, but I finally understood it when my girlfriend pointed out that he is operating on something. From her perspective, everyone starts out as a potential victim, but the moment they are actually victimized, as she sees, they become invested in the system. To understanding this contradiction turned out to be
a lot of trans folks pull this stunt where trans women are men and trans men aren't men, but they also give up their womanhood. In another video answering who Mubina could and could not marry, she quickly and briefly flies through the fact that, by nature of her religion, she's not allowed to marry a woman. That is, by definition, homophobic. It goes even further. In a video they posted to YouTube titled, "Why Can't I Live with My Gay Uncle?" they strongly state they're not homophobic. They wouldn't want to live with someone, for instance, who eats pork, and they believe that having same-sex relationships is not permissible. So that's why he can't live with his uncle. It's a, oh, I'm just hating the sin, not the sinner. It's also a very clear, the only correct version of Islam is the one which is against homosexuality. The comments on this video are more mixed than on TikTok. There are people who correctly point out that this is plain and clear homophobia. But still, there are those who go on and on about how respectful they're being. Respect, of course, is non-raging bigotry. They speak soft and hit you with a big stick. And then they look at the stick they hit you with and they claim, we're against hitting. We don't even own a stick. It's gaslighting. Or to be charitable, it's deflection. If I say I'm not homophobic, that absolves me of homophobia. This way, I don't have to feel like a bad person and don't have to question my beliefs. I don't really want to talk about their bigotry or their happy brand of neo-evangelizing though. What I'm more curious about are the comments on TikTok. Why are people so ready to ignore the stick if the speaker speaks softly? 1. The stick doesn't matter, it's who wields it. The most obvious surface answer, I think, is a knee-jerk reaction to defend religious minorities. In the United States, Christianity is and has been the dominant religious force working both culturally and politically for our entire existence. Violent Islamophobia has been rampant throughout our history, especially taking force after 9/11. President Obama was accused of being a Muslim as if that was some hard thing to be. Disgraced former President Trump enacted his infamous Muslim ban. Indigenous beliefs and spirituality have been subjected to violence and ridicule and forced conversion from our early days. But this isn't a history lesson. Walk Off the Earth is a Canadian band who I know mostly through TikToks. They had a somewhat viral song with My Stupid Heart. They tend to post covers with the band members playing wild instruments. There are boomwhackers, theremins. I find their covers pretty cool, to be honest. In the summer of 2022, there were a lot of really popular covers of older pop songs. One was Blue Good by David Guetta and Bebe Rexha. Walk Off the Earth posted a cover. I really enjoyed the chaos and the bass drop, so I went to the comments, waiting to see other people freaking out about it, and that's where I saw hell had broken loose, just in a completely different way. The comments were filled with people railing against them because member Sarah Blackwood plays the didgeridoo. At least she appears to play it. Some people have said it looks like she's playing some other instrument that's been attached to the back of it just to make it look like she's playing the did. I don't know, it's weird. The comments called the act of playing it disrespectful, as some native peoples of Australia view the didge as a sacred instrument, and using it, especially for a silly little pop song, is kind of sacrilegious. Personally, I don't think something is sacred is a good argument for other people not to be able to bastardize it, but I can understand and find it a healthy argument to engage with that belief, or to end at some kind of cultural appropriation, religiously disrespectful. The comments and stitches, though, went further than that. This cover was a specific instance too far because it was played by Sarah. And Sarah is a woman, and women aren't allowed to play the didgeridoo. You can't play this because you're a woman. It was a clearly sexist statement. The stakes are super low, so I understand thinking it doesn't matter because it doesn't really matter. It's not really oppressive, but it is still sexist, definitionally. But when people would point that out or ask about the sexism, the commentators would get really defensive. They would go on some tangent along the lines of, it can't be sexist, the Yidaki is just men's business. It's also women's business that men don't do. And our ideas of gender and critical theory are modern, whereas this is an ancient cultural practice by a repressed minority. Can't be sexist because of that, duh. That argument doesn't really track. Because you were born as this sex, you can and cannot do X and Y respectively is bioessentialism. It's inherently sexist. To socially construct the playing of an instrument, for instance, as something only a man can do is to, by its very essence, enforce a discriminatory binary that seeks to box people into categories that have been constructed for the specific purpose of division and restriction. That's sexism. There is, though, another defense that people would deploy when the sexism was pointed out. Supposedly, playing the didgeridoo causes infertility. Don't tell the Republicans.
Women aren't allowed to play the yidaki or didgeridoo in Indigenous culture. In this other video, I said women aren't allowed to play it, and people were all like, oh, stop being sexist, your culture is sexist, change it, yada yada yada. That law has nothing to do with oppression. It's to protect the woman. Generally, if a woman plays a yidaki, she's going to have a very, very hard time having a child. The law obviously exists in most Indigenous tribes because somewhere down those 65,000 years, they started to realize that there was a correlation between women playing that and them having miscarriages. So I repeat, it is there to protect women. We are not trying to be sexist.
So it's to protect women. But here's the thing, it doesn't. Playing a musical instrument has literally no effect on your fertility. It's a belief people have, sure, but there are also young earth creationists, and you're just wrong. They made the mistake of stating something that can be checked. When the sexism is pointed out, though, and when this false statement about a scientific thing is pointed out to be a false statement, there's still this heavy pushback. Religion and culture must be respected, even when they happen to be sexist. Except when you point out correctly that women not being allowed to teach in some Christian churches is also sexist. Why can we recognize the stick in some situations, but defend its wielding in others? If the Muslim couple I started this video off with were instead Christians, would people be playing the song and dance of pretending that their queerphobia is anything other than queerphobia? There's a relatively popular mantra meme thing re conservative Christianity in American politics for those of us nominally on the left. I can't do that because of my religion. It's fine. You can't do that because of my religion. It's not. Now, to be fair, I don't necessarily agree on an ethical bit with the first half of that. It's fine politically, it's enshrined by religious liberty, I'm not going to step on that. But that doesn't mean the restrictions you place on yourself, such as Mubina being unable to marry a woman because of her faith, aren't based in bigoted expectation. We can still critique that, but put a pin in that idea. So we tend to understand that, as far as Christianity is concerned in the United States. It's a fight we still fight against a lot of the right wing who do want to enforce their religion and its can'ts on the rest of us. But why do we throw that out when it comes to other beliefs? Another instance of this came recently when art professor Erica Lopez Prater was subjected to backlash, academic censorship, and later dismissal. In a lecture, Dr. Prater showed 2 paintings of the Prophet Muhammad. According to a CBS article, she claimed she gave plenty of warning to her students, including in the syllabus, so that no one would have to see it if they didn't want to. If you didn't know, some Muslims believe it's wrong for Muhammad to be drawn or portrayed in any way. A Muslim student complained to Hamline University, and together with the university president, accused Dr. Prater of Islamophobia. That president later resigned and regretted her role. Prater is currently engaged in a discrimination suit against the school. The responses to this incident were immediate and varied. Part of what seemed to exacerbate feelings of hurt at the incident is a series of Islamophobic moments on campus in Muslim students' academic careers, on top of issues of race. In an article for Religion News Service that I thought was pretty fair and even-handed, Kayla Renee Wheeler and Edward E. Curtis IV go into the intricacies of why the students might have felt especially hurt, while also making sure in their article not to condemn the teacher. The student paper at Hamline took down a letter to the editor from Dr. Mark Berkson, a Hamline professor of religion, who argued that the university and students overreacted to the incident, that depicting the prophet or showing depictions isn't necessarily Islamophobic, and that student religion should also not be allowed to censor academic freedom. The student paper originally posted and then took down the letter, claiming that it hurt students. They've since republished it. The student who reported the incident has implied that not only was she specifically harmed by seeing it after not paying attention to the syllabus or warnings, but that it was morally wrong to show it at all. The professor knew she shouldn't do it. It is wrong to show the prophet. But that's just enforcing your religious beliefs on others, which isn't how secular society works. College students often have weird and wacky beliefs. College is a weird and wacky time. We're all always growing. I'm not going to deny anyone being emotional or making mistakes, or you're right to make mistakes. But why did the paper immediately go on the defensive? And why did so many suddenly take the religious views of a group and hold them above the rights of others? Christians certainly try to ban things all the time, see the Floridian censorship in light of Don't Say Gay times, but we're correctly against that. Do you remember the game Until Dawn? It's a horror survival game that's filled with consequential choices and QuickTime events. I watched my college friends play a bit of it once. Hated it. Don't like QuickTime. It gave me anxiety for a couple of days. Love horror. Oh, so good. Anyway, and I suppose constant warning for Algonquian negatives. Please skip ahead or read now. The game features a cannibalistic creature as the main monster. No, not zombies. Wendigos. The Wendigo is an evil spirit, literally the embodiment of evil from my understanding, that possesses those who partake in the worst and greediest transgressions, such as cannibalism. You may be slightly familiar with internet discourse, primarily pushed by my fellow white people, saying that because certain natives don't believe the word should be spoken, thought, or read, anyone saying or writing it is committing a wrong. Using it in fiction would be wrong. These same people, in my experience, have no issue with people saying "God damn," a thing plenty of people find horrifically offensive for some reason. I've had people request that I not say that around them, so when I'm with them I don't. But that doesn't make my usage of it on my own, or in public spaces, or in my writing, morally wrong, because other people's beliefs do not get carte blanche to strangle me. So why, here again, do people allow that stick to be used and then viciously defend? There does tend to be a tendency to see the world not in a concept of actions, but rather in inherency or teams. See the Israel-Palestine conflict. There are fringe elements that look at the IDF and Hamas killing civilians, and they manage to come to the conclusion that it is not the killing of innocents that's wrong. It's only wrong if you're on the wrong team. That is an extreme example. You see that sort of thinking all throughout politics. It's the primary drive of people who, with media critique, can't stand when people whose goals they agree with are depicted as antagonists for doing something morally wrong. Because being the bad guy is for people they don't agree with. And if someone you agree with does something evil, it must either have context that excuses it, or it must be useless propaganda that ruins everything. These are the people who want to do away with the death penalty in the United States, but if they got the glorious revolution, dun dun dun, would want to use the death penalty against their enemies, who advocate for prison abolition while longing for their opponents to land in jail. It's those who preach love and compassion and policy while gleefully wishing eternal torment in hell for those they hate. They don't really care that the wheel is evil. They have no interest in breaking it. They just want to give lip service to its breakage. What they want is to control it. It does not matter if you beat someone with your big stick. It just has to be you and yours who are doing the beating. 2. It's neither stick nor beater, it's the cadence of the speaker. I said earlier that I think that's a bit easy. Yes, there are people who excuse bigotry if it comes from people they would otherwise want to support. That can be, for instance, log cabin Republicans not caring about the GOP's institutional extreme homophobia because they otherwise are on the same team on taxes and hating immigrants. It can be liberals who excuse the bigotry of minority populations and the oppressed. And I do think that's in play in those TikTok comments of the transphobic couple. But it doesn't hit the full picture. I recently posted a video about Side B Christianity at the Revoice conference, and specifically a Twitter thread where a trans woman claimed that viewing queerness as a sin isn't necessarily transphobic or homophobic. Like with the YouTube video about not being able to live with a gay family member, it espouses that hate the sin, love the sinner can be a loving approach. It speaks with love. If you are kind in your bigotry, if you claim to love gay people, then you're okay, because Side B people who proclaim that all queer people should be celibate in order to be holy in their understanding of Christianity tend not to be absolute assholes. Then that must mean the inherent anti-queerness of their ideology shouldn't matter. Unfortunately for that Twitter user and for Side B in general, the kindness in your voice doesn't remove that you still hold a stick for beating. Revoice, as I pointed out, believes in a divine conversion therapy that will eventually rid us all of queerness. They hold their stick up to the sky and proclaim that God holds a loving stick with which he will beat the gay out of us lovingly. But they speak softly. Consider ContraPoints' Westboro Baptist Church theory of bigotry.
The Westboro Baptist Church theory of bigotry is the idea that bigots are people who don't like sin. We hate you. God hates you. We're all marching around with signs about how much we hate you. The bad guys not going to respect you. There's really two different styles of bigotry. They express the same prejudice, but they're very different. I'll call these styles direct bigotry. Direct bigotry is bigotry manifested in slurs and outright discrimination. Demonizing calls for shunning, subordination, or violence, whereas indirect bigotry says concern or debate about a list of provocation. It's often defensive or regardless. Liberation has now gone too far that it's not the activists who are the new oppressors who are disturbing law and order by killing protests, who are victimizing and silencing people that who are portraying the media and replacing old-fashioned propaganda.
Tired. Why don't you cry for help?
Cancel culture is out of control. Free speech is under attack. There are
Would come. Why would they?
predators,
You're a
murderers,
beast.
haters, rapists,
Not even a king.
vermin, rats, roaches, contagions. Whereas, the indirect people is always defending himself, always a knight in shining armor. For women, defending children, defending marriage, defending freedom, defending family, defending common sense, defending tradition, defending civilization itself.
We see this a lot in specific with vocal political opponents of liberation movements, especially in regards to trans rights. I experienced both things growing up in the early 2010s in Kentucky. I've been called the F slur on the street multiple times in my life. I've had a friend whose mom worried about me living with him because she thought I would RAPE him. What you'll find under indirect bigotry is a subcategory that I think people don't really like to deal with much. It's when people may not politically advocate for anti-anyone legislation, but still personally, lovingly, hold bigoted beliefs. I'll call it pillow touch bigotry. This is where you have the non-affirming Christians who say they lovingly, sincerely disagree. They just think queer people are living in error. They wish they could be affirming, but they can't. They can't support gay marriage or gender transition. They won't necessarily advocate for people not having access to those things. Or maybe on a libertarian basis, they'll even want people to be able to transition or get gay married. But they'll still think it's a sin to be or to act on being queer. It's like, God doesn't like it. They'll smile. They'll tell you they long to hit you with the stick, or that they're being so sweet by smashing it down on your knees. Meanwhile, they're tapping it against your shoulder. They're still hitting you, just not as hard as they could. It's the gaslighting form of bigotry. It's when people say they could never live with a gay relative, but insist in the same breath that they're not homophobic. It's when people play semantic games and think that the phobia ending of transphobia is some sort of gotcha they can employ to thoroughly defend themselves. I'm not transphobic, I'm not scared. Some people employ pillow touch bigotry specifically to watch you twist yourself into corners. Others will use it as a form of ego defense, refusing to allow themselves to see the damages done by their personal views. And as we see online, it can often lead to people defending you. There's a lot of talk about respectability politics, tone policing, and people's hate of having to think about optics. I've got a lot to say about tone policing as a concept on the internet and how it's been perverted to somehow mean you can't critique me for being an asshole to some people. But that's another conversation. For all that talk among certain ineffectual politicos on the left and right who simply want to yell out and bully people, in these instances with pillow touch religious bigotry, the effectiveness of respectability and tone as optics to push viewpoints is pretty obvious. We can think if we want to that if the Muslim couple was Christian, they'd be more likely to be critiqued, but I'm not entirely sure that that's the case. Part of their appeal is the energy they bring to their videos. It's their insistence they love everyone and want to spread understanding and joy before pushing their homophobia and transphobia on you. They label themselves as respectful, purport to have respect for others, speak in a bubbly, happy tone, Lego! And people in the comments defend their transphobia as respectful and thank them. They thank them for their respectful transphobia. Not being an asshole is a legitimate political strategy. Even though it seems everyone thrives off of anger, off of the mistake that is popularism, happy messaging is kind of seen as a relief. And I agree. People should be kinder, but we also have to be careful. Someone beating you with a stick, whilst speaking in gentle tones, does not change that they are hitting you. 3. What matters to the speaker? It's the size of the stick. Besides tone and the various identities of any potential speakers, the other thing that gets us, I think, is comparing sizes. We all love to stand around in a big beating circle and compare the size of who's beating on us and focus on the biggest sticks. That's what I call a good time. It's sensible, though, to look at the various cudgels and focus on the biggest ones. What does it matter if these people are espousing anti-queer beliefs, and they're not the ones attempting to smear all gay people as groomers? Obviously, it's more politically expedient to work together with small bigots to get the large sticks off of us. When side B Christians, those who think it's okay to be gay as long as you don't act on it, are critiqued for harming queer people by holding and espousing anti-gay beliefs and rhetoric, they often pull back in offense and alarm. We're not conversion therapists. We're not the ones yelling slurs and saying you can't identify as gay. Not all of them oppose civil gay marriage. They aren't screaming about hell, and not all of them even talk about brokenness. They aren't hitting gay people with the biggest stick. So why would we ever raise a fuss about them? It's like when people on my side, progressives and liberals, correctly point out that tankies don't and never will hold power because they're all LARPing little babies. But then they go an extra step and say we shouldn't ever focus on them because they're not the biggest stick. But they are still swinging and being assholes. The longest video I've made was a long dissection into the queer phobia of the GOP. I read the national platform and every state platform. I looked at their current governors at the time, all of their then senators, and what were then the major contenders for the primary. In the United States, there is no greater enemy to the LGBT than the Republican Party. I expect the coming 2024 platforms to be far worse. I'll read them when they come, and I'm sure I'll see plenty of talk about new censorship guidelines, the same old conversion therapy desires they already espouse but more blatant, push to turn back marriage equality, and more transphobia than should ever exist in an official document. That's the biggest stick. Defeating them politically, surviving their coalitions, and spreading joy amongst ourselves when we can have to be our main focuses. But other people are still hitting us. Side B Christians still think gay sex and gay relationships are immoral. Many of them support gay people marrying people of the opposite sex. Their main get-together, the Reverse Conference, thinks God will eventually destroy the very concept of queerness altogether. And that's stick. Getting beat with it still fucks you up. When Mehdi and Mubina respectfully spread transphobia and reject their queer family members, they're still hitting someone with a stick. A stick that'll fuck you up. When I was growing up, not affirming rhetoric made me suicidal. Getting hit with the stick sucked. Even when it wasn't the biggest beating. It was still a beating. It didn't matter if this metaphorical stick was comparatively small. Size matters. But it's more about how you use it. 4. Why? Fundamentally, I think we want to believe in kindness. There is a lot of hell bound up in living. With social media, we're inundated with hard news, hard views, and cruel loneliness at all times. So we take those moments we can get that are hopeful. I've trained myself over the years to build a sort of wall of naivete. I have these red color correcting glasses that I sometimes wear because I'm colorblind, and they let me see more colors than normal. I can pass a handful more of those color dot tests. I have literal rose-tinted glasses, and I wear them. I know what they are. Because otherwise, I'll look at trees when I'm driving and I see gray death. My silly, stupid optimism, purposefully baked, is what keeps me alive. Everything, everywhere, all at once. It's hard to be hurt in a place you expect hurt. So sometimes we pretend there is no hurt. But ultimately, you can't optimism your way out of wounds. In the end, people play defense for religious bigotries for all of the reasons above. We can excuse it depending on who's doing the beating, how gently they speak when they swing, or how large the stick they use comparatively is. Conflict sucks. Most of us want to avoid it where we can. Unfortunately, a lot of times, life is nuanced. And nuance is inherently conflict. We need our enemies to be monsters, because when they are monsters, we can breathe easier. Conflict is always external. Because our enemies must be monsters, therefore anyone we ally with cannot be. The oppressed are bound up in a bigotry of low expectations. Those who speak softly are wrapped in a shroud of clouds that we pretend are pillows. When we're beat with small sticks, we know there are worse ones out there. The monsters are the powerful ones who throw out their roars and swing wildly with a bludgeon. But unfortunately, there are no monsters. There are only humans, and there are plenty of them out there who have realized they can spread sexism, homophobia, transphobia, racism, anti-Semitism, xenophobia, every bigotry that exists, and get praised for it so long as they speak softly and carry a less big stick.
And for now, it's three wolves howling bravely now. 3 hearts breaking and 3 souls mending the wounds that we can bear to share. We'll come when you're crying and hold you higher than you can. Suffering is easier in company when someone's there to hold your hand. And there's no more waiting, let's get going. It's time for our story. Time for us 3 wolves howling. Time for your story.